Salutations from space. This is Gemini Brett with the dream astrologer Gary Caton. I am Agent 1123 of the Cosmic Intelligence Agency, and we are here. From space. Hold on, we don't want to listen to that. Sorry. We are here to go live to speak about the thrice great Hermes Trismegistus. We're coming into a Mercury retrograde, and the point of this thing is don't get played by the Mercury retrograde, play along. And I thought I would bring my dear friend, mentor, Gary Caton on, who is doing profound work into the Mercury cycle. I met Gary when we both presented at one of the shamanic astrology conferences a couple years ago and was so intrigued by the alchemical language that he was speaking. And he talks about the emerald tablets of Hermes, which just says, as above, so below, right, Gary?
A little bit more than that. It's pretty concise as alchemical texts go. But yeah, it's actually a correspondence between the above and the below, right? It's not like the stars are causing something to happen here on Earth, you know. There's a conversation that's happening between the above and the below.
We could even maybe say a relationship. And before Hermes says, as above, so below, he says, as below, so above.
Indeed.
So let's actually hear the words of Hermes from the sacred emerald tablets. And I'm going to start with the Isaac Newton translation.
All right.
It sounds a little something like this. "'Tis true without lying, certain and most true. That which is below is like that which is above. And that which is above is like that which is below, to do the miracles of the one only thing. And as all things have been, and arose from one by the mediation of one, so all things have their birth from this one thing by adaptation. The sun is its father, the moon its mother, the wind hath carried it in its belly, the earth its nurse."
It is the origin of all, the consecration of the universe. Its inherent strength is perfected if or when it is turned into earth. Separate the earth from fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with great ingenuity. It rises from earth to heaven and descends again to earth, thereby combining within itself the powers of the above and the powers of the below. Thus you will obtain the glory of the whole universe. All obscurity will be clear to you. This is the greatest force of all powers because it overcomes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. In this way was the universe created. From this comes many wondrous applications, because this is the pattern.
This is the pattern. And the pattern of many things. The emerald tablets are endless and can be interpreted in many ways and applied, more importantly, in many ways. But one is, and Gary has decoded this, that it applies to the pattern of Mercury retrograde and the Mercury cycle at large, coming from the heavens down to earth and back up above. And so one of the great ways that we can play with the emerald tablets and their instructions is to participate in relationship with these great heavenly cycles, so that we don't get played by the Mercury retrograde, but rather play along. So Gary, maybe you could decode a bit of this sacred song for us.
Right. So you have to understand that this is not just some obscure document that's talking in some coded language about some philosophical concept that is only intellectual. Okay. That's not it at all. In fact, what this is talking about is very real and very concrete. And I actually proved that by matching the astronomy of Mercury with a couple different passages in this text. So you'll notice that I said it's not only philosophical and intellectual, but also concrete and real. And that's really what the alchemists are talking about when they talk about the above and the below. Okay. They're also talking about the difference between our sort of mental, rational, and or language type awareness and our more instinctive and emotional animal awareness. So there's all kinds of different correlates for the above and the below, right? One of them being that, for instance, right now, today is what's known as Mercury's maximum elongation. So what does that mean? Well, we could, make some crude jokes about that, I suppose. But maximum elongation from what? From soul, S-O-L, from the sun. You see, because Mercury and the sun have this dance that they do around each other as they go around the stage of the zodiac, if you will. And I really have to thank my my editor, Jen Zart, for forcing me to think this way, because she's like, I want one chapter. I've been writing a book about Mercury for like a few years now. It's gone through several iterations. And she's like, I want one chapter that explains the astronomy in everyday language so people can feel it. It's not just intellectual, they can feel it. So I talk about this dance that Mercury and the sun do together. And we can imagine the stage, the zodiac, as the stage. And what happens is they do a dance around each other 3 times as they circle around the entire stage of the zodiac. So they do a dance in which all the moves of the dance are repeated 3 times as they go around the stage. And the way this dance is performed, the dancers are never far enough apart from each other that you will lose one of them if you focus on the other. They're always very close, right? The sun and Mercury in the sky are never more than about 28 degrees apart. And if you hold your arm out of course that looks very big, but if you hold your arm out towards the sky with a closed fist, the size of your fist is about 10 degrees. So if you put 2 of them together and then like go bloop and add another one over here, that's 30 degrees. That's just Mercury and the sun never get any further than that. So they have like this invisible cord that's always stretching and relaxing. And the maximum elongation is when they're at that furthest part where their cord gets stretched to the maximum, okay? And what that means experientially is that in terms of speed, as long as Mercury's traveling faster than the sun, right? Mercury will be moving out ahead of the sun. If Mercury's traveling slower than the sun will be catching up to Mercury. So they do this dance where they're constantly swapping places in the sky. And the place at maximum elongation is the place where their speeds are matched. So their speeds, they're going through the sky at the same rate. Sun's not catching Mercury. Mercury's not outpacing the sun. Their speeds are exactly the same at 1 degree a day, roughly. And so what's happening here is that Mercury is slowing down from being faster than the sun, matching the speed of the sun, and then is slowly going to gradually get caught by the sun. And what that means in terms of visual apparition, if we go out and look at the sky tonight, you'll see Mercury as high in the sky as you'll ever see him above the western horizon. And the thing is, it takes about 15 degrees, so a fist and a half, for a body to even be visible, right? So a planet has to be at least 15 degrees from the sun to even be visible. And also the sun has to be 15 degrees below the horizon for you to see anything in the sky, right? So if Mercury's 20 some degrees from the sun, The sun's 15 below the horizon. Mercury's only going to be about that fist above the horizon, fist or two. So Mercury, that's why Mercury is Quicksilver, this fleeting messenger who's kind of sneaks in and out of, if you don't have a clear, unobstructed horizon, you're not going to see this cat. He's hard to catch.
Yeah, I went last night out to see him because he's at this maximum elongation place now. And in the northern hemisphere where he is in the earlier degrees of Virgo, it's much more difficult to catch the trickster. This is one of the reasons why he's the trickster. As an evening star in the sign of Virgo from the northern hemisphere, you in the southern hemisphere have a much greater chance of seeing Mercury as evening star now. And when Mercury's on the morning star side, we'll have a better chance in the northern hemisphere. It just has to do with what sign Mercury's doing the dance in. And we'll maybe speak a little bit more about that. But I just want to say this is one of the reasons why Mercury is the trickster. And when you do see him, we know planets don't twinkle like stars do. It's a steady light. But in the reaches of the horizon, because of the atmosphere and the pollution and whatnot, planets do twinkle. And so even when you do catch Mercury, sometimes it's like, wait a second, is that Mercury or is that a star? I'm really confused.
I've been tricked. I got to tell you, I got to be honest. I've been tricked more than one time. I was looking at a star, thought I was looking at Mercury. And you know what's crazy about it? The great astronomer, Copernicus, who gave us the heliocentric system by which we've lived for the last few hundred years. He was Polish, and he lived in a valley at a pretty northern latitude. And, it's thought, now this is all speculation, but it's thought that he may have never laid eyes on Mercury because of, living in a valley and at a very high latitude. He may not have ever even laid eyes on this phenomenon, which is like unthinkable to me.
Yeah, and I don't believe it. I mean, because in some signs he does get really high. I mean, I've been out with astrologers and said, look, there's Mercury. And they're like, no way. And they're holding up their iPhone app and they're like, he's way down here. I said, yeah, that screen's a little bit bigger than yours. And that is Hermes, right? But let's talk about Copernicus a little bit, because one of the things about retrogrades in our tradition, especially Mercury retrograde, is there's so much like fear around it, and your computer is going to blow up and you can't communicate, and don't even try to speak with your spouse, and clear your bank account, and just all this stuff, that isn't really too productive in these techniques of prediction. In a way, astronomy has healed some of the superstition around the retrogrades, because when we were living in a geocentric or earth-centered model, there was really no way to accurately describe what it was that in our skies a planet would stop and hit rewind and start moving backwards through the constellations and stars of the zodiac and the signs. But we've rectified this by finding the truth of the sun-centered heliocentric solar system. And we often say this with retrograde planets. It's just like when you're passing a car on the highway, that car appears to be moving backwards. But that's true for outer planets, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. For the inner planets, it's a little bit different.
They're passing.
If you just think of my face as the sun, okay? And you can maybe use the yin yang here as a sign, and that totem as a sign, whatever, right? Usually you're going to see the planets going in that direction and through the signs in this way. But when they come retrograde, because you're the screen where you're looking from, you're the Earth, here's Mercury coming between my face, the sun, and you. Now you see that motion is backwards through the same signs where it was forward that way. So it's Mercury passing the Earth. And one thing that means is, and this is true for all retrogrades, in the middle of the retrograde, in the cazimi really, at least for the inner planets, that this is the closest that Mercury gets to Earth. Now, he's also between the Earth and the sun, right? And so some ways I like to vision into sometimes the tricky space of a Mercury retrograde is, imagine the sun is like this great source of ripples in this pond of space. And here you are as Earth receiving the ripples. And here comes this little stone that's going to cause an interference pattern, right? And it's also, and I love our friend Adam Gainsbourg speaks about this, like every planet has a sphere, and then when they get close to one another, their spheres kind of intersect. So these things mercurial get turned up to 1,000. Yeah. But so in astronomy, we've in so many ways released the fear, because when we don't know a thing, especially academic folks like myself, we tend to be afraid of it. And I think a lot of the astrological projections around retrograde still carry that fear of not knowing a thing. In a way, because of this strange divorce between astrology and astronomy, which are meant to be one and the same, we haven't caught up to the full extent in the astrological fold with releasing the fear of now knowing what this is. And for me, because Mercury is as close to us as possible, I mean, I was taught that when Santa comes around, you bring out the cookies and the carrots for the reindeer, you make an offering and give a wish list. And this is my practice with the Mercury cycle. And I've tuned it to what Gary has shown me in his decoding of the Emerald tablets to the Mercury cycle. So first of all, Gary, I'll ask you a series of questions that I think will lead us through this. What's the name of the book that's coming out?
The book is volume 1 of a series of 3 books, of course. You're going to do Mercury, you got to do 3. And the series itself is called Hermetica Triptycha, which simply means 3 books, 3 books of Hermetica. And that's a little bit of a daring title, because the Hermetica are a series of mystery texts, sort of like Gospels almost in the religion of Hermeticism. But these are more like astronomical Gospels, if you will. And volume 1 is called the Mercury Elemental Year, because there's a pattern. Right, we have 3 Mercury retrogrades each year, and they are, about 4 months apart. So 4 months times 3, 12. Basically, they form a trine in the sky, so that all 3 of the Mercury retrogrades in any given year are activating the same element. This year, that's the earth element. Next year, it'll be the fire element. And so there's this other pattern when it was talking about its father is the sun, its mother the moon, the wind carries it in its belly, its nurse is the earth. Notice that pattern there, right? We go from fire, sun, water, moon, wind is air, and earth is earth. So fire, water, air, earth. Well, that's backwards from zodiacal order, yeah? But Mercury retrograde goes through the elements in backwards order, yo. It's perfect.
Yeah, and so the Thrice Great, you say you have to write 3 books, right? And the triptych, we have all this languaging because Mercury, for 3 weeks at a time, 3 times a year,
so many 3s,
dances retrograde. And he was called Hermes Thrice Great, Trismegistus. This is actually one of the Kundalini mudras for Mercury, right? It's Jupiter, but Mercury is thumb to pinky and the 3 fingers up, the Thrice Great. And I like to say, if this is Mercury, well, what is Mercury retrograde? I got to turn it around and flip the script, hang loose, right? So why do we get so tight in Mercury retrograde times? In the above and below and below and above, this is the decoding that Gary has brought to me that has totally shifted my own ceremonial practice for Mercury retrograde, which I'll share with you. But Gary, what is this, the below and above and above and below?
Right. So as I said, there's a few different ways to think about it. We can think of the above as the sort of rational mind. We can think of it in shamanism, right? It's not uncommon for people to think of God in terms of a triptych. Father, Son, Holy Ghost, for instance, is a major way of thinking about the divinity on the world at this time. But what about you and me? Do we have 3 parts? Well, yeah, according to shamans, there's not just 3 worlds, the above, the below, and the middle earth, right? But that each one of us has 3 selves that correlate with those 3 worlds, right? So we can think of the above as what shamans would call the talking self. This is our normal everyday awareness that, you and I can have a chat, we can talk about any number of things and so forth. It's not so good, for instance, for dodging rattlesnakes. For instance, like being like a mongoose, being like, yow, you know, stuff like that. That's a whole nother level of awareness, right? You ever seen a mongoose dodge a snake, man? I mean, it's like, it's like ballet and everything. So when I'm riding my bike, for instance, in the morning, right, I'm in a total different kind of awareness. It's a body awareness. It's an instinctual awareness. That's like my lower self. Right? And that lower self has been around way longer, yo. Language is have you ever seen those movies where they do the whole history of the evolution of the earth, and then humans are like in the last minute, right? If you got 60 minutes, humans show up in the very last minute of the thing, right? Well, if you take that and do it for the time humans have been around, language is on the last minute. You see? So we have this hardwired instinctual awareness that has been pushed into the back by language. And in many ways, we tend to think of our talking self as superior, and so forth. But, you know, this instinctual awareness, the ability to dodge a snake, the ability to, you know, react and to move and to have it to say, this person isn't telling me the truth. These abilities are what kept us alive as a species for millions of years, so we could develop this intellect. Yeah. So if Mercury is shifting from a place where he's really highly visible and all of a sudden his speed begins to slow down, number one, and he begins to get lower in the sky before disappearing altogether during the retrograde, then if we want to dance the dance of Mercury, we should be doing the same thing. We should be doing number one, slow down. Number two, some people would say go within. I would say like engage your emotional and or bodily, you know, instinctual awareness a little bit more. Be a little bit more aware of, listen, look, you know, it's like crossing the street, you know, look both ways, like, you know, I was going down the bike trail this morning, right? And I'm in a nature sanctuary. It's a beautiful place. And I'm going down the trail and dude's walking down the trail looking at his phone. And I'm like, ding, ding. I hit him with the bike bell, you know, and
Maybe he was looking at a chart.
I don't know, man. I mean, I can't imagine looking at one of those things when I'm going in a nature sanctuary. But my point is, like, if you're going along with the normal awareness that when Mercury's going fast and like outpacing the sun that we get caught up in, and then Mercury goes into this other mode, you're gonna be like caught by surprise. So if we can switch selves or switch worlds along with Mercury, then we're probably gonna have a lot easier time of it. Yeah. Yeah,
and I've got a bunch of things to add, and I'll try to go quickly, which we know is not my forte. But let's say traditionally Mercury is known as Gemini and Virgo, his domiciles, and now Mercury is in Virgo. And there's a distinct difference, obviously, between the Virgo mysteries, an earth sign, a chalice, and the air sign of Gemini. And so many ways, like the Gemini kind of feels like the morning side of Mercury, rising before the sun, ready to go, that kind of quick nature. And then Virgo brings us into the earth, into the body. So a couple of things to expand upon what you just shared. One, the above and below, we can think of as the visible and the invisible. And for our engagement with Mercury, he, as Gary was describing before, if he's not more than 15 degrees away from the sun in the zodiac, and he can only get 27 max, and he doesn't usually in every cycle, we're not going to see him. He's, as we call it in the astrological tradition, under the beams. And you can see the beams when the sun sets and you have that, those levels, there's that yellow where you're not going to see a planet in there. Sometimes Venus, because the goddess shines so brightly, but Mercury never. He's got to get further from the beams. And when a planet is under the beams, from our point of view, it is unseen. It is in the realms below. Yeah. And it's really interesting that it's from Earth's point of view, when planets get close to the light, they go into the darkness for our experience. But don't we often have our greatest visions with eyes closed? Yeah. So Mercury will pop out on the evening side as he is now. And we'll describe why we see this as the end of his cycle. Yeah. And the sage, the bearded sage, the wisdom state, a very kind of Virgo nature as well, which is the experience of the body. But he'll dive back into the realms below. So from the above, the visible, to the below, close to the light, under the beams, the invisible, the below, and then he'll pop out as the sun passes Mercury, and they're going in opposite directions from our point of view. He'll rise before the sun as evening star and make himself visible there. That's the other above. So there's the below, invisible under the beams, the above, like the above evening side, back to the below, and then the above morning side. That which is below is like that which is above. That which is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the one only thing. So one thing I'll add more about that before we get to these three sacred points of the cycle and how it tunes us into a specific zone of the zodiac is Gary was sharing these beautiful transmissions around, the three ways of being, of like heavenly and middle world and underworld, as it's expressed in so many shamanic traditions. But we also have this expression when you're talking about riding the bike and how it's basically the body mind controlling that thing, right? So I can drive my car. I can be tripping about the things that I have to do. My body, my earth drives the car. My air is processing the to-do list while my heart is still so engaged with this love that's opening up or whatever. And they're totally in different directions, And so part of the practice to seek the fire, the spiritual element, is to align what Gurdjieff called the three brains of human, right? The body brain, the heart brain, the mind brain in these practices. And so Hermes, Mercury, when he slows down, he helps us slow down to find a stillness so we can bring the three together to access the fourth and become the fifth. All right. So what Gary showed me, which is so profound, is these three places, the maximum elongations, as Gary explained, when Mercury is furthest from the sun. And that's literally happening today, which is why we are sharing right now. That above corresponds to the below. And where is the below, Gary?
The below is when Mercury, if I am now the sun, when Mercury's passing right in front of the earth, in front of the sun, from point of view of the earth, Mercury is about 48 million miles away. Now, the sun is about 93 million miles away. That's also what's known as an astronomical unit, the sun-Earth distance. So Mercury is about half of that. Mercury is as close to the Earth as it can get. And so this idea of above and below is also in the astronomy, right? Because when Mercury goes around here on the backside of the sun, Mercury is about 138 million miles. So it's a good bit more than that astronomical unit. So we can think of the above and the below also in terms of the cosmic space. Mercury's farther from the Earth than the sun. In the above, or superior, that comes from the Latin word superius, which means above. Mercury in the above space, the farther than sun from Earth space. Or Mercury's in the below space, the inferius space, the closer than sun to Earth space, right? So Mercury's passing between Earth and sun, and the only planet that gets closer is Venus. Venus is about 24 million miles at perigee, but Mercury is as close as he ever gets, and we call this the Cazimi in traditional astrology.
What does that mean, Cazimi?
Cazimi means in the heart of the sun, so that there's a there's a sort of an allegory of a meeting with the king, right? If the sun is the king, Mercury's passing through the same degree as the sun. Mercury must be meeting with the king, in this secret meeting, because we can't see it, but our math tells us we know it's happening, right? So Mercury went into the castle. He's having this secret meeting with the king or queen, the sovereign, whichever, and then he exits on the other side. So I've been using this in my practice for a very long time. I mean, one of the very first things I was ever taught as an astrologer back in the early 90s was to follow the new moon and the full moon, right? So one of the very first things I learned, hey, look it, you got a new moon in a sign. 6 months later, you get a full moon in that same sign. So you plant the seeds of your intentions at the new moon, you reap the harvest and being a gardener my whole life, I was like, oh yeah, that's a growing season, 6 months, that makes perfect sense. We can do, so I was teaching people to do the same thing with these conjunctions which is right in the heart of the retrograde too. It happens right in the middle of the retrograde. I actually purposefully started my podcast during Mercury retrograde, right? And people, oh, don't do anything during Mercury retrograde. Well, because you'll have to do it over. Well, isn't that the kind of the point of a podcast? Number one. Number two, the classical idea was that when he was within this 1 degree of the sun, there was this special window of opportunity. I mean, getting to meet with the sovereign, or even on a local level, meeting with the mayor, for instance, or whatever. That's a pretty rare thing. That's a powerful opportunity to have the ear of someone who has a lot of influence, So this is the below, this is the inferius, this is in terms of the alchemical formula, you have the nigredo, the darkening, the blackening. This is when Mercury becomes invisible. Then you have the albedo. This is the whitening. This is the flash of light in the middle of the dark, this flash of awareness of, oh, I've seen the light, as Mercury crosses the sun. And then later we get the rubedo, the reddening, which is when the life returns and Mercury is in the morning sky. So there's 3 basic stages to transformation there.
And of transmutation, and it might have come from you, but I love this metaphor for it. Well, first of all, I first heard from you this beautiful expression from the alchemical tradition of, for when the matter becomes blackened, rejoice. Now you know you're on your path to purification. And we know sometimes it is the things we go through that we grow through, yeah. But of the wound, and we get cut, and that's this like nigredo experience, this blackening, this pain in a way.
Right. It's all black and scabby, right, at first. Yeah. And then you peel the scab off there and it's kind of white. It's like sort of like, there's this new skin and stuff. And then later it gets red because the blood's getting back in there and stuff. Like that's the 3 stages of healing too.
Yeah. And that redness, that scab even, or maybe even a scar, reminds us to stay tuned to the practice of what we learned through this opening to bring, literally the white blood cells, but to bring the light. And so, I like that you kind of degenderified this thing. It's not just king, it's queen, but it's the light. And Mercury is the messenger, receiving the message from great mystery at that time of Cazimi, in the very middle of the retrograde cycle. And if we're so lost in fears and don't do's, we can miss this opportunity to tune into that message, to literally see Mercury between us and the sun. I wanted to show a thing on the chart here about Mercury through the elemental years and the above and the below points. So I'm going to share my screen and take us through a little bit of astronomy on the chart. And I think I'll take us back to 2015 because we actually had a time where Mercury transited in the sign of Taurus in May of 2015, because typically, as will be the case coming up here, when Mercury's Cazimi between Earth and the sun, from our point of view, he might be above or below the sun, just like every new moon is in an eclipse.
Wasn't that 2016, bro?
Right, 2016. Thank you. Yeah. I'm like time traveling once again. So let me share my screen and we'll see how this goes. All right. Hopefully everyone's seeing this. This is the chart for the moment where I sit in Seattle, Washington. Jupiter has just risen. And I'm going to take this down to Sun and Mercury. Okay. And as most of us know, this is the horizon on the chart, the east. For the northern hemisphere, the east, the south, the west, the north. Or I like to say the rise, the reach, the rest, and the roots. The southern hemisphere would be east, north, west, and south. All right. So when Mercury, as we'll be here in some hours, this is the sun setting, right? This is the sun just went under the horizon. And I'll bring it a little closer up. But you can see now the sun has set and Mercury is an evening star. So is Jupiter. So is Saturn at this time. Yeah. Where's Mars? We don't see Mars. He's under the beams, having just had Cazimi himself. And I think we'll get back to that. But if we track Mercury and the sun, I'll just move through days here. We know he's evening star. And here he is, maximum elongation. So the sun's getting closer and closer. He goes retrograde. Then very quickly, they're one and the same. Now, if I brought that back above the horizon, you know, showed you like the Mercury Cazimi, for example, which is going to be on August 26th in this cycle. And I'll bring them back to the evening star side. It doesn't matter that he's above the horizon because so is the sun. We can't see this happening, yeah? But as we move through the days here, sun and Mercury are separating, and eventually he gets far enough from the sun that now we can see him rising before the light in the morning star side of the above. And I want to take this down back a couple years here. So just track how if Mercury's on this side of the sun, he's a morning star. And if Mercury's on this side of the sun, he's an evening star. So again, we saw how Jupiter and Saturn are evening stars right now, because when the sun sets, like Mercury, they're in the realms above. Whereas Venus is a morning star right now. So like tomorrow morning, for example, Venus, you can see rising before the light bringer. All right. So let's take this back to just Mercury and sun once again. And I'm going to go back not to 2015, but to 2016. And I'm going to go to January that year. And what we're going to see here is Mercury as an evening star in the sign of Capricorn. And I think what I'll do is we'll just track this on like what's called the natural chart with Aries on the rise. I'll make this whole sign and I'm going to play this through time. Whoa, hold on a second. That's good enough. Or is it? And I'm in 2015. There we go. That's what I want. Bear with me, folks. Mercury is about to go retrograde. The technology is blowing up on us. Or actually, it's just my idiocy. Anyway, so let me play this through time. I'm going to get us back to Aries on the ascendant, the natural chart. Here, fire enough. Okay, and now I need to figure out the magic button in this great software, Intrepid. And we'll cruise by days. I'm going to speed it up a little bit. And notice how Mercury retrogrades in the sign of Capricorn. And then he's going to have his Cazimi in the sign of Capricorn. And now, see, this is the morning star side, right? Capricorn. So he retrograded in Capricorn. He went direct there in Sag. So from the earth to the fire in a way. And I'm going to speed this up much more now. There's this time in the Mercury cycle where after being the morning star, he goes literally from our point of view behind the sun, disappearing into the darkness, the psychopomp, the crow, being initiated. And then he comes to rise on the other side as the evening star, as the wise sage. Retrograde in Taurus, this was the transit right there in the early degrees of Taurus, and then he shows up as a morning star, right? Let's speed this up a little bit more. So the deal is in 2016, all the retrogrades were in the earth signs, all the Cazimis in the earth signs. And this is what Gary's saying, that Mercury has elemental years. Here we move into 2017.
Fire.
Yeah. Well, where am I now? Oh, I see. I see 2018. My bad. I wasn't tracking the clock. I really am having technical issues, but let's just watch this still. So we'll see now Mercury's doing his retrogrades in the fire signs. We're in 2018. And he does the same element for his 3 retrogrades for an entire year, sometimes 2. It's either 4 or 6 of these cycles. And it's really, I'm going to stop sharing this because it's just getting out of control, and I'll just share it with words. It's a really beautiful thing. Like in 2016, all the retrogrades and directs were in the earth signs exclusively. Now, what does that mean? It's telling us to activate our body mind. That one that rides the bike, not looking at the iPhone, right? And coming into the temple of the body, into the earth element, the senses, the sentient experience. In the retrogrades here in 2017, Mercury's retrograding in the earth signs, like he's just about to retrograde in Virgo, but he'll go direct in Leo in the fire. And he's giving us a premonition that the next element in which he will dance is the fire element. So one more thing, and I'm going to share this chart more successfully now. Here is today. And again, this is maximum elongation. And so as the sun sets, we see Mercury as evening star just above the horizon. And we come into this time where Mercury retrogrades here in Virgo. And then we come into the time where he goes back under the beams and he's Cazimi. And he will be Cazimi, the 4th degree of Virgo. Well, where is he today? At maximum elongation, that same place of the zodiac. The above is like that which is below. And then later, what's the date of his maximum morning, Gary?
1 second. Let me find my screen.
So one thing I can do is just say, well, it's going to be around here, September 14th, September 13th. How do I know? Because it's in the same zone of the zodiac, not always the same exact degree, but the place where he is most visible, or she is most visible as an evening star, is the same zone of the zodiac, that above as the below, the Cazimi, and then as the following above is morning star. So the above.
Sorry, man. Go ahead.
What's the date?
July 29th today is evening elongation. August 26th is the conjunction, the below, and September 12th is the morning elongation.
Right. So today's the elongation, about 4 degrees Virgo, above evening star, below Cazimi, receiving the new message, literally being born into a new cycle to bring the message of the Virgo mysteries over the course of his next 4 months. And then the date you said was September 12th.
Yep.
And we'll see that now he's morning star, rising before the sun, and the same zone of the zodiac. So it's not always the exact same degree, but we saw 4th degree, 3rd degree, 2nd degree.
Yes, within a few
4th, 3rd, depending on how you do the thing, tuning us in not only to Virgo, but to a very specific place of the Virgo mysteries. And I think that it's really important for us to understand that in these cycles, just like new moon every 29 and a half days, well, we have a new Mercury every 4 months. So we have one coming up when Mercury's Cazimi, August 26th. But still right now, we're actually finishing a cycle that began in the sign of Taurus on April 19th in the very 1st degree, where since that time, Mercury rose as morning stars. I received the message. This is what we're about. Taurus, sensuality, sentience, embodiment. He went behind the sun, disappeared into the darkness, had the superior or exterior furthest from Earth, alignment to the sun, and then showed back up and now in the sign of Virgo, showing us the wisdom of these Taurus fruits that he's been cultivating over the course of this 4-month cycle. And he'll retrograde and he'll go back into the light to receive the message from the light to say, this next 4 months, we Virgo. And very amazingly, as we shared, I didn't do too well successfully in the chart, but 2016, 2017, both Earth elemental years for Mercury, and it culminates in this final one, the one coming up that begins very soon in a theater called You, in the sign of Virgo, one of these signs traditionally said to be ruled by Mercury. Enough
Yeah,
for me.
I love what you're talking about, like that we're sort of sandwiched in this time that's between this Taurus alignment and this Virgo alignment, right? Like these last 4 months have been sandwiched in that. And guess what? You were born in a time that was also thus sandwiched. In other words, we can use these Mercury alignments as a container for any given event, such as the birth of a human, for instance. And I actually took that and did this whole involved chapter in my book about, of course, if Mercury is activating a trigon, like 3 signs of the same elemental triplicity each year, those would correlate as 3 houses in the horoscope. So that even if you weren't born with Mercury retrograde in your personal chart, there was still the reverberations of the Mercury retrograde were still happening in those 3 signs of that element. So that you might feel in your chart those reverberations in those 3 houses, right? And particularly the 2 houses that sandwich your birth. You might feel like retrograde-ish about the affairs of that house. That is going against the normal, right? Quote, normal, which, so that, in other words, there's this, if we think about above and below, if we think about above as consciousness and below as unconsciousness, that is, or collective consciousness, right, where the archetypes come from. These houses where these retrogrades were occurring before and after your birth might be the source of archetypal insurgencies into your life, where the unconscious intrudes through these houses to show you things that are not normal. Because guess what? The only way anything ever changes is by some not normal stuff going down, and that not normal stuff eventually becomes normal. Normality is changed, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I actually went through Astro Databank and looked up like thousands of charts, and I went through hundreds of examples in my book about how these different trigons activated in your chart can play out. And it's absolutely fascinating stuff, man. I mean, I've never done anything like this, and it's just like looking at prenatal eclipses, for instance, was pretty common practice even back in the Hellenistic days. They would say, you know, this eclipse happened, you know, right as before you were born, or, you know, well, sometime in the, you know, while you were in your mama's womb, has some influence and blah, blah, blah. But I took it the next step to say, yeah, and the one after your birth has some kind of bearing too on, because these two contain your birth, right?
Yeah, so let's just say for folks to so you can find that, simply look for when Mercury retrograde is conjunct the sun before your birth, and Mercury retrograde conjunct the sun after your birth.
Yeah.
Born between those two. So like somebody born right now, they're born between that early degrees of Taurus, Cazimi, earlier this year, and the coming in a couple of weeks, the Virgo Cazimi. Yeah. Right. And they're born into an Earth year.
Yeah. So for instance, if somebody is a Capricorn rising, right, then that would mean that houses 5, right? From Capricorn, go 5, you get Taurus. From there, you go 5 more, you get the 9th house to Virgo. So their houses 5 and 9 would have been activated by the retrogrades before and after their birth. And so you have basically these various combinations. You have like, you could have 1 and 5, you could have 5 and 9, and you could have 9 and 1, right? So those are all part of what I call the identity trigon, because 1 is the angular house between 1, 5, and 9. So I talk about the identity trigon and what that's about and what it means to have those various pairs of houses activated and stuff. And yeah, and there's actually 125 years of ephemerides where, you know, you can look up which one was before and which one was after. So this is something that is, as far as I can tell, it's like the first time that anything like that's been done, that I know of.
So one thing about the retrograde, going inside, slowing down, but there's also something about bringing it back. And Gary and I spent some time in Sedona, with Mercury is a very bright and visible evening star. Earlier this year, we were out there taking a lot of pictures of Hermes and Galactic Center. And, Gary, I actually wanted to mention that. I just remembered that because I have my teacup tarot going, and the cup that I drew for myself is my cup of Galactic Center.
Nice.
And Gary and I we did talks together in Sedona in early April, right around Gary's solar return. And my talk, I just wanted to mention that because we're going to have them up for free at Cosmic Intelligence Agency. We were going to sell them, but kind of in memory of the great John Major Jenkins, who passed away very recently. And John decoded the Mayan calendar and brought it into the truth of galactic alignment, the turning of the ages. He then sourced traditions from many cultures to show how profound this time that we're living in now. And I gave a talk about that called The Sacred Journey of Souls. And then Gary gave an amazing talk about elemental alchemy and the alignments of Jupiter and Saturn, which happen every 20 years, but also spend 200 years in a element. And so that will be up to see. I really encourage people to member up with the Cosmic Intelligence Agency. Members receive all sorts of amazing stuff. Bill Meridian just did an amazing talk about eclipse paths, a webinar, and that will be up there.
If you haven't seen Bill Meridian, that in itself is worth the price of admission. Dude is amazing with regard to eclipses. Studied with Charles Jane. Bill's awesome.
Yeah, it was an amazing webinar. I mean, obviously, we've been really tuned into the eclipses. I actually wanted to bring that in today. It's interesting that less people, it seems, are tripping about the Mercury retrograde because the astrological attention is so heavily on the eclipse. Right? Yeah. Hey, where are you going to be?
I forgot to complain about Mercury retrograde.
And what I will say is this eclipse in regards to Mercury and to Mars is going to act like an ultrasound. So what do I mean by that? And I mean this. Let me share my screen again. All right. So again, folks, Cosmic Intelligence Agency, we're going to be doing more and more of these go lives too. So on your Facebook page right now, Cosmic Intelligence Agency, you can click the down arrow for follow and just make sure you're selected all for receiving notifications for when we're live. You have to set something up on your own page to make sure that you're getting notifications of go live in general, but please do, because we're going to do more and more conversations like that. In fact, I'm hoping to interview our buddy Adam Gainsberg, who along with Gary is one of the members of the Sky Astrology Conference. So Gary, would you maybe share a little bit about SAC and the happening in Colorado next year as I'm dialing this thing up?
Right. So Adam and I got together back in 2007 at the Project Hindsight Conclave, and Adam really turned me on to more onto the work of Daniel Giamario, who is the common thread between Brett and I. He mentioned we were at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School together. And so Adam and I have been working together a long time. Julian Lewis is also going to be there, and Andrea Michelle Kennedy. The four of us make up the SAC team. The last one we had in the Bahamas was really awesome. We saw the evening sky alignment of Mars and Venus with the moon there. But a lot of people said, being in a foreign country and stuff was hard to get to and stuff. So we're doing one in Colorado this time. It's still a 4-hour drive from Denver, but the darkest skies in the country, yo. I mean, it is. And if you haven't seen dark skies from high altitude, it doesn't get any better. I mean, there's going to be meteors. There's going to be the Perseid meteors. There's going to be, you'll see the Milky Way, of course, because when you get dark sky, you get the Milky Way. Saturn will be near the galactic equator still. Jupiter will be visible. Venus will be very bright. And Mars will be the brightest Mars you've probably ever seen. Mars will be super bright, the brightest that he's been in at least 15 years. And that's happening in Moffat, Colorado at the Joyful Journey Hot Springs. if you know anything about Colorado, it's just on the western side of the Sangre de Cristos. So it is just north of the Great Sand Dunes Monument down there in southeastern Colorado. And so we're going to have hot springs, we're going to have skies, we're going to have teachings. It's going to be a really awesome time to get back in touch with the originating genius of astrology, which is the sky, man.
Yeah, I mean, so SAC stands for Sky Astrology Conference. I'm just looking, by the way, at this phone to review how this go live's, looking at the text working out, and I'm not sure, but hopefully we'll keep the faith. So when we engage with the teachings of the sky directly, I mean, this is one of the things where Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, where I started with Daniel Gemario, who Gary mentioned, or Gary himself, very connected to the sky, having received astrology from a dream. My experience is pretty similar, though for Gary from Venus and for me from Jupiter. And Adam Gainsberg, who I hope to bring on for a conversation here at Cosmic Intelligence Agency as well, about the Mars cycle. In true Gemini fashion, I'm kind of working now on my own development through Daniel's connection to the Venus cycle, Gary's connection to the Mercury cycle, and Adam's connection to the Mars cycle. And we just had this Mars Cazimi. So when we talk about these cycles, it's a synodic cycle. Right. So, for example, the moon gets around the zodiac in 27.3 days, but because the sun also moves from our point of view, new moon to new moon is 29.5 days. And that is the meeting from Earth matter of moon and sun. Well, this is true for Mercury as well, about every 4 months, for Venus, about every 19 months, for Mars, about every 2 years and change. And we just had one of these meetings with Mars. So hopefully everyone's seeing my screen now. We'll see how that goes. I'm going to leave. This is today with Mars and Sun still Cazimi, because Mars moves at the most similar pace to the Sun from our point of view. He actually stays aligned within 1 degree to the Sun for the longest time. He's also under the beams and in the lands of invisibility for almost 4 months, the longest of all the planets from our point of view. But Mars very recently in Cazimi kind of got seeded into his new mission, conceived in the sign of Leo. And again, I hope to bring Adam Gainsberg on to speak about that. And we know, as we've been discussing, pretty soon in a theater called You, Mercury will receive the new message from the Virgo mysteries, from the light, about how to Virgo for us for the next 4 months. But one thing I love about this eclipse that's coming our way is that the light's going to go out as moon eclipses the sun. We're going to see, if we're on the path of totality, a very bright and beaming high goddess Venus in a place we can never receive her bright light in this way. It's a profound part of this eclipse. I think it's very important. But one thing I've been tripping about lately is, well, you can never see Mars under the beams. And he's been conceived, but he hasn't been born into the light yet. And Mercury's going into the womb for his rebirth, in a sense. And I love that it's like the light is the womb. And therefore this eclipse, because the light's going to go out, it's like an ultrasound, because I think we're going to be able to gaze upon Mars, and upon Mercury. And Mars, who's just in a sense at the beginning of a cycle, ready to be born, and Mercury, in a sense, who at the very end of his cycle is just going into death, which perhaps is birth. We get to take a look into that great mystery of the light and see these sacred cycles beginning and ending.
And Regulus, yeah.
Regulus
too.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm praying for clear skies, man, because like that doesn't come around very often. And as a stargazer, as a sky gazer, that's one of the coolest things I can possibly imagine, seeing Mars in broad daylight.
Where are you going to be, Gary?
In Cashiers, North Carolina.
Cool. Yeah, I'm going to be in Idaho, and at an Eclipse Within event. I'll try to put a link to that here. You can check out morethan.astrology.com, which is where you can find me, Gemini Brett, Agent 1123, cosmicintelligenceagency.com to find the CIA, and dreamastrologer.com to find more of Gary. And, I just wanted to share this kind of my ceremonial approach that I've connected through your teachings of the above and the below and the below and the above. So tonight I'll go out and I'll attempt to see Mercury, but either way, just going to the west where I know he is about to rest. at the height of this cycle in preparation for the coming Virgo way. I'll set some intentions for Mercury to help me tune into the Virgo mysteries of body, mind, and the practice and the rubido and these kinds of themes that have come along. And I'll bring him offerings, like I was taught to bring Santa cookies. And the way that I bring Mercury offerings is I first marry them to my wish list. So I might have some intentions. I might see, for example, Mercury's doing this dance, honing in on my personal Juno and my nativity. So you might see in these early degrees of Virgo, a planet, one of your houses. You might tune your intentions to asking the messenger to bring you a message of how you can activate that in a more profound way in your own life. And then bring an offering that's connected to them. And so, I mean, you can literally bring, flowers or whatever, but what I like to bring is sacrifice, because Mercury on the first day of his life not only invented harmony, but he invented sacrifice as well. And I'm not talking about slaughtering some animal out at the beach tonight. I'm talking about, I will sacrifice this thing in me. Like I will give you my fascination for sweets. This is actually one of the 3 things tonight that I'm going to give to Mercury. And it's kind of a 6-week time between tonight and September 12th. And so we come and we say, here, I give you this, and I will stay true to this separation from this thing that I've held to make room for your teachings within, to bring the message of how I can better align myself to Virgo, to Juno, as I'm expressing. Maybe it's your Venus or your Mars. Maybe it's the square to Jupiter. Who knows how it's activating your own nativity. And I will make this offering, make space for the message. And then when Mercury is Cazimi coming up here, and the same degrees of Virgo on August 26th, what I do is, like in the noon height of the light, I go to the sun, and I know Mercury is between me in the great light at that time. And I just check in. I say, look, man, the sweets have been out. I'm starting to receive these visions. I'm not so sure, but I just want to make sure I'm still true to this thing. And then in September 12th, when Mercury's at his maximum elongation in the morning sky, I go and I rise before the sun as he does, as she does, and go to the light of Mercury with gratitude, having now received that vision. And it works every time. And now I can start eating cake again too, if I want to. But it might be smart to maintain this sacred diet for the entire 4-month cycle, because I've been initiated. And now there's that time for the integration.
Yeah, it's beautiful, man. And I do the same thing in my book. I offer people some different opportunities. I think now is also, if you think about the shadow, right? In the West, as primates, when the sun sets, we have this sort of, deep. We were talking about instincts before. I mean, as a primate, your instinct is to get in a tree, because like the leopards are coming and stuff, or get inside as a modern human. So there's this, there's this shadowy sort of, but another way to invoke the shadow is to look back across the day, reflect as a spiritual practice, look back across the day and see, wow, look at all that happened today and stuff. And so reflecting, looking back and saying, and you can do the same thing with your life, reflecting and looking back and saying, wow, look at how far I've come. And there's this thing that I used to be really close to that I don't know if I need so much anymore. So practicing what the Native Americans call a potlatch or a giveaway, and just saying, hey, you know what? I don't need this anymore. Here, would you like to have it? Kind of thing. What Brett was talking about, a fasting ceremony, is a very good spiritual practice to go through. And I go through like 2 or 3 of these exercises with each of these alignments, right? And give people different ideas about how, things that they can do to sort of ritually and viscerally engage with this dance and make it real in your life. And so I think it's great that you're doing that, man. I mean, that's a wonderful embodiment and a wonderful sort of way to, show people how to walk the talk, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, for me, that's the thing with like Saturn cycles. I could read books that just say I'm going to be depressed for 9 months. Or I could say this is 9 months. That's gestation. This is rebirth. How can I guide my rebirth? By working with the rules and, Saturn, right? By working with the cage to like choose liberation and freedom, Saturn,
Yeah.
wisdom earned, right? And so with Mercury, instead of just saying, okay, this 3 weeks is going to be terrible, because I can literally create that experience if I'm tripping on that. And I think collectively, when we trip on that, we can create that experience for the world, because we are the ones keeping the astrological connection. So it's also our responsibility, in a sense, to clean up our expression, I believe, to bring people into an empowered way, because that which is below first is that which is above. So it is our relationship. And when we come to the planets in a way that, I'm not just like a child, like exposed to the crazy fates, but we're participating in relationship, and especially having a visible relationship. Because when I speak with you, I want to look at you in your eyes. And I choose to do the same with Jupiter and with Saturn and with Venus. And that's my trip, whatever. But, let's say, Gary, if we wanted to tune this into the Virgo mystery. So, one thing that happened in Sedona just before you showed up is I was out shooting Mercury, and it got dark because, the sun had set, and I kind of lost my path on the way back. And one thing that we do for Hermes is stack Hermes, right? Stack stones. We're going to call them cairns. But that practice, because it's crazy Jenga, if you've lost your way, will slow you down to receive the message of to go left or right, Well, in Sedona, they have these things that I call perms, because they're like wire wrapped stack of stones that demarcate the trails. And so when I saw one, I was like, oh, there's Hermes showing me the perm. I was like, oh, wait, it's Hermes. And I said, right, because this is Taurus, and we're thinking about beauty and style, and he's bringing it back retrograde. We're talking about the throwback to the perm. And I decided not to share that because it's so ridiculous, but then I did, because things just kept coming in where people around me were getting permed. But I felt like Taurus was talking about coming back into our beauty, coming back into the awareness of our sensuality. And Virgo, so many ways, coming back into our practice. A word that I love for Virgo is independence. Your direct connection through the temple of your body, through the voice of the earth, into your own spiritual connection. And whatever practice it is for you, be it yoga, meditation, etc., that's one of the Virgo mysteries. So I would invite you to look at the alignments in your chart, as I mentioned before, but also maybe just feel into what is the Virgo principle in general? How is it being projected these days? And what is it really? So the archetype that Daniel Jamario first taught me about Virgo that I love so much is the priestess, or I'd like to say also like the druid or the green man.
Yeah, the keeper of sacred space, man.
Yes. Yeah. So do you want to add anything about Virgo and just tuning in for this particular cycle as we wrap up, Gary?
Well, I mean, this idea of keeping a sacred space, I mean, right over here, I have an altar with all four elements, represented. And I have found that simple practice of keeping an altar and watching out for, if I find a cool stone or something, and celebrating that moment or that experience of what, and then bringing it back and putting it on my altar and changing out the elements and the representations for me. Well, it's like you said, having a relationship with the elements. That is being a true keeper of the sacred mysteries, and or going out into this temple of the sky.
Yes.
That is being a stargazer. That is being a keeper of the sacred mysteries. So, it's a Virgo. It's like, where's your temple, man? And like, are you really keeping the faith? Are you really keeping that space sacred, or have you let it get dusty and so forth?
Yeah, I love it in alignment to this eclipse, just that Mercury is retrograde in the sign of Virgo. And in fact, the degree of the zodiac where he stations direct is the last degrees of Leo, right where the solar eclipse will be. And that is not some coincidence. We know this in astrology, right? So one thing I would say about that, and I've shared this, and I actually recorded a conversation with Maurice Fernandez. I was just at his place in Sedona last week. And unfortunately, like the video got messed up. I'm just looking actually on my phone at this video, and it seems to be like stuck on a chart. So hopefully it's flowing. And even if it got paused in the visual, hopefully people are hearing us, we'll find out. I'll post a link here as well to I put up on my podcast because I recorded the audio of my conversation with Maurice. So you can check it out if you would like. But we also want to, when I say like, okay, it's not bad and it's not that old way, we have nothing to fear and let's all do this and it's all bright. Like, I'm not saying that at all. We want to honor the shadow. We want to honor the tradition. We want to honor where we're at with it. I've had flat tires and missed planes and Mercury retrograde, like no doubt about it. But when those things happen, it's asking me to slow down. And then going in to receive the message that is opening up for me is really important here, you know? So we'll see if the tech worked out. We'll see how the great Thrice supported this mission. But so this thing about Mercury retrograde in Virgo during this Leo solar eclipse, well, we know the Leo solar eclipse is at Regulus, is at the Bedouin star, the magical star, the heart of the lion, the star that ruled them all. And when we think Leo, we think of king and queen and royalty and radiance and these things. And it's really interesting to me that with Mercury retrograde in Virgo, bringing us back to the Virgo mysteries, and with the star Regulus, this lion heart star having precessed into the tropical sign of Virgo in late 2011, 2012, right around this time of like the galactic alignment and these things that you can check out in the share that I mentioned earlier. It really reminds me that the truest way of royalty, the first service, is to the land. And so as we are called to cultivate our radiance, our will, you know, bring that spirit by connecting the three bodies, not only to see it above, but to bring it and anchor it into divine will in our own will. We're being reminded that that place, that fire exists in the temple of our body. So coming into our practices is really the calling, I think, and the invitation of Mercury, who's saying, how did we used to do that? You know? And how can we, I mean, what if literally like the outer world royalty actually respected this truth that their first service is to the earth? Of course, that's not what we're seeing in a time when we need black snakes of false.
Well, you know, that's the other thing about what you're talking about, bro. Regulus is the last of the four royal stars to precess into the mutable or common signs. So a lot of people are saying that what that means is like popular sovereignty. We are the sovereigns. It's up to us.
This is the dawning of the age. There is those, you know, Daniel told me that about the Aquarian dispensation, that yes, it was once true that there were only these leader royal bloodlines, but now that thing, because everyone is so beautiful, has been fully dispersed throughout the entire population. And that's part of the promise. But I love how you mentioned that Regulus, and the other stars would be Famalo across the way, now in tropical Pisces, the star of the southern fish, which is a symbol of the water bearer, the constellation we call Aquarius, the eye of the bull, Aldebaran, the heart of the scorpion, Antares, the keeper of the corners of the heavens. And it's not like one precessed in there like Tuesday and the next goes in Thursday. I mean, we're talking about separation by centuries in the case of Aldebaran and Antares going in. And then Famalo, I mean, what that must have been about 200 years ago or 250, something like that?
Yeah. So 3 degrees times 70 years for a degree. So yeah, right about 200, 250, yeah.
Yeah, and so now we're getting into some trippy stuff, but that is something that I try to help decode of precession of the equinoxes, of galactic alignment, of the turning of the ages in the sacred journey of the soul talk I gave in Sedona that we're going to make available for CIA, not just to members, we're going to make it available to everyone. Gary's talk of the elemental ascension from lead into gold in this Jupiter-Saturn dance is a profound and important talk. I'm really excited for you all to be able to see that if you choose to. So follow us at Cosmic Intelligence Agency. Check out cosmicintelligenceagency.com. Check out morethan.astrology.com, MySpace, and dreamastrologer.com, Gary's Space. And look out for the book. When's it being released?
Very soon. We're working on the cover at the moment, and we're like, you know, days to weeks from release. So
amazing.
More very soon. Yeah.
So hopefully we'll share that up here at Cosmic Intelligence Agency. I'll certainly be talking about it, and I hope you'll check it out because it is in a way not our responsibility, but our divine right to be creators and to be creative and to realign, not by avoiding the roots of the tradition, but in knowing that essence of where we are rooted, to allow the branches to grow in new directions. And that's what we're doing here in astrology. And I'm so glad you are doing it with us. And I'm so glad, Gary, you are doing it and you are helping guide my course and so many of your sharings. I really appreciate the knowledge that you share and you spending some time with us here today at the Cosmic Intelligence Agency.
You're welcome, my friend. Always great to have you.
All right, brother. All the love, and I will see you in space.
All right. Love you too.